and we are going to take a look at sine cosine tangent, but with angles. So in the last video, we've been taking a look a lot about sine cosine tangent, but we only found the dimensions of the triangle in terms of the length. But what happens if you come across these kind of problems? Instead of looking for the length of the triangle, turns out we have to look for that x marks the spot, but that x is the angle, not the length. So how do we solve it? Well, there's no really clear definition of what to do, unless you use sine cosine tangent. So to start things out, first things first, let's then see what happens to the triangle if we label it with our directions. But before that, we have to say, so, ka, toa. That is because that phrase will help us with sine cosine tangent. So, about the information of the triangle, what does the 6 and 4 represent? Well, the 6 represents the hypotenuse, and the 4 represents the opposite. So, when we have the hypotenuse and the opposite, let's use sine, because sine is SOH. Sine is opposite divided by hypotenuse, but we have to do that by theta, aka the angle. So, here's how we're going to set things up. So, sine, S-I-N, to x is going to equal opposite divided by hypotenuse is going to be 4 divided by 6. But hang on, that just didn't do any help. It didn't really help us at all because we still have that missing x into the equation. We don't know how many degrees that angle is and how many degrees that x is, but all we know is we don't have an equation that actually helps us. Or do we? What happens if I divide this by sine and divide this by sine to get x alone? Well, here's what happens. X has to be somewhere around because when you use sine cosine tangent, your mathematics is not going to be 100% accurate because it's going to be by decimals. Wait. Divide by sine. What are we going to do? Well, if you remember back in 8th grade, when we have a fraction by 1 over 10, what can we transform that to make 10 on the top of the equation? Well, 1 over 10 can be transformed to 10 to the negative power of 1. So what we can do about that is, if these two are the same, 1/10 is the same thing as 10 to the power of negative 1, then we also should say that the sign can also be a negative 1. So we're going to say that x is similar, the x is going to be around the sine to negative 1, multiply that by 4 over 6. So now we'll need a calculator of how we are going to do this. So here's the calculator right here. We are going to turn it on, clear it from your last problem, and if you ever notice, if you look at the sine cosine tangent buttons right here, you'll notice that sine negative 1, cos negative 1, and tan negative 1. Well, if I just say sine, it just says sine. Cosine, the same thing, tan. If I try to do tan and hit to the power of negative 1, it's not going to do that because your calculator will run into some kind of domain error. But if I click on the second button, but then click on the sign, there it goes. See where it goes? Sine negative 1. Then we have to multiply it by 4 divided by 6. And when we do that, we get our final answer. So that x has to somehow be around the dimensions of 41.81 degrees. So that is saying that x right there should be around 41.81 degrees. but it's not 100% accurate. Let's move on to another one. So, hey, looks like we have another problem to solve. So, going back from SOHCAHTOA, what is it? Well, if we go back to the triangle, we can label. This is going to be our hypotenuse. And right over here is going to represent our adjacent. That's going to be our adjacent, because if you go right here, the adjacent, if you try to touch the ground, theta is going to be right there, and the adjacent is going to be touching the hypotenuse at the angle. Many kids get this incorrect because this and this are confused. If we have theta as an indicator, if we have an angle, when we say cosine, adjacent and hypotenuse, it's going to be matched right there. The opposite is not going to touch the x, so it's not going to touch the angle. It's going to be the opposite from it. Get it? The opposite? So that's why we say hypotenuse and adjacent. So now we get to find the cosine, because we want to do adjacent divided by hypotenuse. But, if we do the cosine of x, is going to equal to 27 divided by 33. Again, it does not help us. But what if I divide by the cosine, and here is the math. 1 over cosine is going to be equal to cosine to the negative 1 power. Therefore, x somehow has to be around the cosine of negative 1. Multiply that by 27 divided by 33. Now, if we go back on our calculator, x somehow has to be around for the measurement of x right there. If we go back over here, here's what's going to happen. We're going to say second cosine. And then we have to multiply that by 27, divide that by 33. When you do that, you'll get your answer. So, our answer is going to be around 35.096 degrees. That is the measurement for that x right there. Well, or close to, because it's not 100% accurate. So we are done with this one. The next one we're going to do is going to be a lot different than the next two. But instead of the word, say, sine or sine, well, the signs are going to be different as well. So, another triangle. What can we do with that one? We have to find the x right there. So, remember, write SOHCAHTOA so you know what happens next. Okay, so we have the adjacent. The adjacent right there, because that x is touching the hypotenuse, and this right here is going to be the opposite of somehow that we own x. Now, we can use the tangent, because we can say the tangent is the opposite, divide that by the adjacent. But problem comes. If we do the opposite, divide that by the adjacent, it's not a good idea, because we still have that x as a missing degree measurement. What are we gonna do? Oh, got it! What we can do is divide that by the tangent, divide this by the tangent. 1 over the tangent is going to be equal to the tangent of negative 1. So therefore, x has to somewhere be equal to the tangent of negative 1 multiplied by 29 over 14. So when we do that, our x, or our measurement for that degrees, has to be somewhere along, let's look right here, beside the second tangent of 29 divided by 14, 64.23. So we're going to say the answer is going to be 64.23, or close to that answer. That is how many degrees that measurement of x might be. Remember, this mathematics is not 100% accurate, because even if you try different ideas or different strategies, you'll always be off by a little tiny decimal. So you'll probably be at a high yield, but your percent error might be off by like maximum 2%. So, thank you for watching Top Penalized Math Industry. I hope this video has helped you understand sine cosine tangent with angles. Like and subscribe!